momentary preparation at the beginning. All right, this is going live. Just getting up they should be providing a link in a moment. I grab that link and okay, that's good. Harry, that is great. I come over here.
Oh, and just open up share screen so that we can.
Yes, I did that already.
Oh, okay, cool.
I did that already. And that is all updated. So that should be good to go, folks. I want to welcome you here to a new episode of NDs for Truth, Season 2, Episode 8, with Dr. Jason Loken, a friend of mine, a fellow spiritual light warrior, a brave soul that I respect greatly for his work. That we've been in on doing this together from the get-go of this whole of these shenanigans. And Jason and I have done various work, various talks. We had this thing going called Follow Your Oath, and we had some great discussions with really intelligent medical doctors from Canada, the US. Some famous people that was really cool to be chatting it up with. And Jason is you have an amazing podcast called Inspired Health, correct?
Yeah, Inspire Health podcast that you've been on a couple times for different shows.
Yes, it's been an honor. It's been an honor. So welcome, Doc. It's great to have you on NDs for Truth.
Yeah, brother, it's good to be on here and good to chat with you again. Yeah, the good old follow your oath days when we were all kind of meeting up regularly, and then everybody kind of like went their own way after everything kind of hit the fan. And yeah, good to be back in contact again. So
definitely, yeah, we were basically like we were hitting the ground running all the time when a new thing broke out. Like the CDC announced some ridiculous new policy, and we were on it, like discussing the sheer silliness of a lot of the things that we were witnessing firsthand. It was fun.
Oh, it was fun just sharing the screen and kind of taking each other's perspectives. And what was kind of fun with it is everybody had a slightly different sort of piece of it, but it was such a fun way to just kind of go back and forth. And I mean, I think we did an awesome service sharing lots of really great information, most of it which was all right there on either CDC or WHO or off PubMed studies. I mean, most of it was just right there. We were just kind of shining a light on it.
Exactly.
And ultimately with the goal that people could see more of the information and then just have a better concept to make an informed decision. That was really at the heart of it.
That was at the heart of it. And that's what we wanted to do. And this was all in the wake of, like, I think it was Kono had been heavily censoring naturopathic doctors and still continues to do so around COVID. And so here's a ragtag bunch of naturopathic doctors, not like still expressing ourselves and not just kowtowing to that, ordinate that obviously came from some of the higher levels where the censorship is originating from. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that still the censorship's still there. Sorry, that's my daughter bringing something in.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, go in there.
No problem.
Go. Yeah, I mean, I think that censorship's still all there. I don't think that's gonna get any better anytime too soon, but I think it's people are just more aware.
Yeah, the more that we move forward, the more it seems like there's some measures that are being taken, the more it just seems so absurd that they're still holding up these premises, these fronts that they continue to, push on the public. It seems absurd.
I think to you and I anyways. So,
yeah.
I was talking to my wife earlier about a lot of the stuff going on. It's like sometimes I really do feel like I'm living in a little bit of like a bubble, like in a bit of a dream, because it sometimes like what seems so obvious at times and then other times like sometimes like is this really the reality or what's going on? Like it really does feel like you're living in two different worlds sometimes.
I think that's what's happening, on a consciousness level. If we could have a really elevated third eye perception, you don't even need that elevated third eye to see what's happening now. There was this there's this publication in the IQ Haiku. No, sorry, IQ magazine. Did you read that one?
No, no. Which was this one about?
Basically, the premise was, all right, so the who's to blame for this? Because obviously the vaccines are not helping, and there's a lot of adverse reactions. There's deaths. So basically, what the article was suggesting was that the non-vaccinated were to blame because they had inside information and they didn't properly share that insider information with others to get them to not take the vaccine. So it's the non-vaccinated are to blame.
Well, that's really funny.
It's just that's a good one. That's a good one.
It's
That
just like a flip
transcends.
way of trying to blame them again.
Yeah, right, exactly.
I don't
Yeah.
know. I know a lot of the people that had concerns were usually pretty vocal about their concerns, despite the fact that it was really uncomfortable in a lot of ways to voice your concerns. I mean, it always is to voice something that's not the official narrative, regardless of what situation you're, even if that's just at home. I mean, to say certain things when everybody else is going to look at you like, "What are you talking about?" And to still talk about it.
Or
But
even worse, not just what are you talking about, but or you jerk, you're to blame, you're killing people, and the ostracization that happened in families and businesses,
yeah, yeah, for sure.
schools. schools. So there was a lot at stake. And I think that the non-vaccinated, not everybody, some were quiet, but there were plenty of oppositions to it, and that just makes it all the more serious an accusation. It's so bizarre. I call it a low Q, not an IQ magazine. It's a low Q magazine right now.
There's so much of that stuff now, Moshe. It's like I see it. It's like I just kind
Yeah,
of think so much is going to come out in the wash at some point, anyways. And really now it's like, we went through phases. There was a period where it's like I really wanted to bring awareness to certain things. And I feel like that was when we were at the heyday with really kind of putting out stuff with Follow Your Oath. And then after a while, it's like I just wasn't all that interested anymore in that. I really wanted to focus on just what do I really think is important for people, and that's when we started to really fine tune even different series that we would do on the podcast just to try to create support. Like we did like the know thyself questions to facilitate a return back to who you truly are. It was like
yeah.
something that just allows people to connect more with the truth of who they are so that they can again make informed decisions, but coming from a place that they really know where they are and who they are, and more of a place of self authority as opposed to outer authority. So then it was just like series after series to try and just what's going to be supportive. After a while, you just you can only look at so much of the stuff. I mean, God bless people like Dr. Peter McCullough and people like this that are constantly out there, because you need that. You still need people to kind of keep bringing information up to challenge what's being on, or showing
Absolutely.
another perspective to it. So.
Absolutely, I agree 100%. For me, the same thing occurred, and I figured, okay, so I could see there's lots of people doing the talks out there, so the information is available. So I started to do things on Indies for Truth that I truly just was passionate about and I wanted to do. Like
Yeah.
I had last a couple of weeks ago, I had Dale Pond on, and he's a brilliant researcher in sympathetic vibratory physics. John Keeley, Nikola Tesla, Victor Schauberger. And it was so edifying for me. And I think that anybody that's interested in that can get a lot out of it. So I'm starting to branch out a little bit. It's not just the COVID political craziness going on, but also branching out a little bit. So that's been fun. That's definitely been fun.
I'll have to check that one out because that sounds really interesting. We're going to do a series probably after this one, which is this one's currently on life, death, and beyond, exploring our greater reality, which is fascinating. But I think we're going to do one that's going to be on more around energy medicine and sort of beyond our perceived reality, because that's really where you have to start to go when you're looking at how do some of these different therapies actually work, beyond the physical, right?
Yeah, for sure, for sure. So let's jump into one of the topics that we were going to discuss today. And I'll have you share your screen in a moment, but let's just sort of preamble a little bit about it. So,
Sure.
you know, I would say just about every rock has been overturned in the last 3 years. People are just revamping and taking an honest look at everything that we have taken for granted. And I think part of the reason for that is a lot of us have realized just how far reaching the deception has been by the people that are behind COVID. Let me just put it that way. So everything is up for grabs to kind of to relook at it. Our science, our medicine, our politics, our history, name it, right? So one of those things is viral theory. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Like, I know that you had Dr. Thomas Cowan on your episode, on your show, and it was a great talk. I really enjoy listening to him. I think he's got great ideas. And I want to discuss those with you. So go ahead and just throw whatever comes to mind right now.
Yeah, I mean, well, I've just been curious too around all of this, and his main perspective. I've interviewed him twice now, just because I find him. I think he's really intelligent, and I like his perspective, and he's kind of got this question everything sort of attitude, and he
Yeah,
doesn't necessarily say he knows the answer. He's just
that was clear,
basically.
actually.
Yeah, I mean, he's quite humble that way. He doesn't claim to know the answer, but he will say that what we have based so much on from this concept of a virus, he goes, it's just never been proven in the way that probably the vast majority of people, including most physicians, just don't know about. I think we assume that when someone says they isolate a virus, that they've actually isolated this virus, just like you would isolate caffeine from a beverage or something. But I mean, I wasn't aware of the process of it until I had kind of gone through his book and
And
interviewed
Andrew
him.
Kaufman is also one of those voices of this message today.
Yeah. And they kind of often, I think, do stuff together. And I'm not saying I know what any of it is either, but I definitely think it's sort of like we're doing this with everything, where we're really sort of taking just a relook. I think we're getting an opportunity to sort of relook at a lot of different things that we have based where we currently are on, and to see, like, was that based really on the most solid theory we could have, or maybe it was on what we thought it was, and maybe that time is transitioning and we need to relook at new ways to do things, just like I
Yeah.
would say in our school system, for example. Maybe there was a place for it at a certain part of time, and now maybe that's no longer in the best interest for people. It needs to be something different.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
but
So
yeah, so I mean, his whole thing was basically just saying that, they've never actually shown a virus in its whole form. It's never been done. And even when they say that they've isolated it, he explains it's like it's sequences upon sequences, and it's like, they eventually take a piece of it that they think is the actual thing. And
yeah.
he's also done his own experiment, as well as the original guy, Dr. Ender, who did the original um, whole protocol for trying to isolate a virus, that they found that they could isolate the virus if they had a sample, like say a sputum sample that was supposed to have the virus in it, and they could do the exact same and find the exact same thing without having any sample of a virus. So he's basically saying the results are really an artifact of the process. The process itself is not an accurate process. So he says we shouldn't be basing everything on a process that is not really validated in the way that it really should be.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. And I'm comfortable with that. The one thing I'm not ready to jump on board with, and I'm still in consideration of, is the idea that because we haven't isolated the virus in a proper fashion, therefore there is no virus, and therefore some are even going so far as to say there is no such thing as viruses at all. Like I'm not ready to make that jump, because I mean, I've seen some things that there's nothing like the science that you could observe with your own two eyes.
Yeah.
Now, I know that there's some possibilities there, so I am open. And like you said, we're in this mindset of considering all possibilities. But like, I mean, like you have, let's say you have oral herpes and you kiss somebody and they get oral herpes from you. Well, how does that serve? Like, if there's this no virus thing, it's just triggering the person's lips in the same exact way to have this outbreak the way is predictable for this particular virus. Or like my daughter, she got I think it was roseola. So there was this girl that came over, and she left, and then we found out that evening that she had roseola. Well, then my daughter got roseola like a day later or 2 days later. I forget exactly the time, but there was a direct correlation there. And the explanations of some of the folks that are considering no viral theory, they're not satisfying. They don't really resonate fully for me yet.
Yeah, I mean, again, like, I don't know the answer either. I mean, I know I've seen things like hand, foot, and mouth spread really quickly. So it's like, okay, well, to me, that seems like there's definitely something going on. And
Yeah.
I asked him too. I said, like, what's at the heart of disease from your perspective? And I'll show part of his my chat with him in a moment here, but he kind of broke down, which I actually find really fascinating. I think there's a ton of truth to too. Is he ends up talking about water specifically and kind of getting, and I'm not going to give it justice here because he gets into it more
And
in the
I
episode.
would encourage listeners to
So
check
you
out
get the
the
whole
whole.
picture.
Yeah, yeah. You know what? Let me just write a note. I'll put the link
Sure.
in the description after, okay? For
But
yours. Okay.
what I think is really fascinating is like he's kind of really looking at sort of disease in a broader perspective and sort of looking at it from more of almost like a field perspective that the field sort of changes and then we end up becoming almost in resonance with different things, right?
Yeah.
And that has come up several different times with different guests that I've talked to. I mean, I'm reading this book now and I've done a couple trainings with them. I've done the foundational, the advanced training with them. It's brilliant stuff. This is all on what's called biogeometry, but Dr. Ibrahim Karim, just genius. But I was just reading something specifically. He was talking about water again, and he even has a section on there talking about can we have a pandemic that's a mental emotional based pandemic that through that, this more subtle, abstract sort of dimension of health, that if that is in a certain place, that we then become in resonance with certain physical things that then can actually cause harm in that way. But
Right.
is it actually just the physical thing, or is it more coming from this mental emotional? I mean,
It
we
could be
know
both. It could be both. The natural, a lot of this is very naturopathic. Like there's some medical
totally
doctors
is.
that are that are basically touting these theories. And then I think this happened with Dr. Larry Polevsky, where, I said, that's naturopathy. And he was like, rah, like he was basically like, nah, but the truth is like, I can see the terrain being incredibly important, and the idea of resonance and taking in negative toxic thoughts, toxic environmental conditions, EMFs, makes one predisposed to lower vibrations, which may invite organisms that resonate at that level to then come in and create pathology, which is ultimately to resolve, to move towards health, to move towards equilibrium.
Right.
Like, even if viruses exist, it doesn't mean that they're a pathological enemy of humanity, right? They serve a positive purpose.
Well, and that's even kind of like the whole pleomorphic sort of theory. You look at some of the work by Dr. Jerry Tennant, who wrote Healing is Voltage, and I interviewed him too for a detox series. But I've done work with him for over a decade. I think his stuff is brilliant, and he would show that different microbes change depending on your current state of health. So what might be beneficial in a certain way actually becomes problematic when your cell voltage drops, when oxygenation drops, when your overall health starts to get lowered. Now these things become actually a problem. But when in an optimal state, they're usually synergistic or at least no problem. I mean, I would totally agree. I don't think of all of the different viruses and everything necessarily as being a problem. I think that there's a relationship, and are we in a healthy relationship with them, or are we in an abusive relationship with them?
Yeah.
And a lot of that depends on our terrain from all aspects of health, our physical, mental, emotional, spiritual terrain. All of that filters down together on, I think, what our overall resilience and susceptibilities are.
Yeah, definitely. And if you recall, we talked about children having leaps after they get sick, after they have the flu, they have a fever, and then all of a sudden they're speaking clearer. They're stringing together more words in their language. They look bigger. So there's something to be said about this upgrade, a possible upgrade, even for adults, that we might be getting an upgrade when we experience something. I would say when humanity at large is experiencing a global issue, then there's something collective happening. And so it's almost like each person's rite of passage going through. I felt that with this whole COVID business. And I don't see a problem in employing the use of our model of medicine, terrain and health and all these determining factors, and there being a virus. The
Yeah.
two are not, it's not mutually exclusive. So, that's kind of all I really have to say about that in terms of my critique. But it's a critique it's a pending critique. There's no stark conclusions that no, absolutely not. One thing I would just mention about Dr. Cowan is that he's very open-minded and he's not condescending in any way, but he does sometimes let it slip. And he says very, decisively, there is no virus.
Hmm. Well, and how he's saying that, I think, is that based on what we are able to, he's saying there's no virus and that there's actually never been a virus that has been um, proven to exist. So whether you're talking about he said COVID, or whether you're talking about HIV, or whether you're talking about measles. He said, so what he's saying is that you can't even call it a virus because all we've gotten is like, he kind of does this example of like, a house that gets demolished, and he gives this whole sort of example. And it's like you
Yeah.
find remnant pieces of it, and you're like, oh, well, that was the gremlins that destroyed the house. He's like, based on this little piece, you're saying that it's this. He says you can't do that. Where we actually do isolate different things, different bacteria. We isolate it. We know what it is. It's not the
And you
same
could
process
also
of
visualize it under a microscope, electron
right.
microscopy, whatever.
So he's just kind of saying, I think he's making his point that he doesn't even want to talk about it because it hasn't been proven yet in the way that he says it needs to be proven to be validated. So I think that's kind
Right.
of where he goes with it. And sometimes I think that's just like to create a strong stance to like, okay, then prove me wrong. Right? Then figure out a better way and show me what you got. He's totally open to that happening. He says, I'm fine with being wrong on it, but
Yeah.
it you can't even talk about it until it's been validated in the way that he says it needs to be validated. So that's
Sure,
kind of
sure.
where he's at with that.
It just makes me think of certain things that I've brushed up upon in my studies in naturopathic medicine and adjuncts to naturopathic medicine. Are you familiar with the work of Dr. Royal Rife, the Rife
Yeah.
machine? Okay, so Dr. Rife was basically working on targeting viruses and bacteria and maybe fungi and simple organisms with frequencies with his Rife machines. And he had a hard time seeing viruses. So he built this crazy contraption that enabled him to visualize what the virus looked like. Now, whether or not it actually was the case, I take it for granted that he spent, like, in his time, so much money and so much time, and he was able to actually witness these organisms responding to these frequencies and people getting better. And there's a story of cancer, lung cancer, like something like 11 people with lung cancer in that time, and after a few weeks, half of them were cured. Another 2 weeks, they were all cured of lung cancer. So he was doing something positive. Now that doesn't mean, I have to say, because we're being thorough here, right? We don't want to just throw out stuff, and it doesn't mean that something else isn't happening inside of the person. Maybe those frequencies are actually helping a person detoxify better,
Right. Yeah.
right? It could be. So I just want to put that out there. It's possible. But, there have been people who have worked on viruses and they think that they're targeting an organism that is responding to a frequency that is curing people of the condition that particular organism is alleged to, create.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And I generally, I liked a lot of the work that Rife did. It, from a certain perspective, I think it makes sense when you do think about medicine or healing from a frequency perspective. I think we see that in our own way in different things. Sometimes I think of that like isopathy or something along those lines. I think you
Yeah.
can, we'll even make remedies. I will take like samples of saliva and blood or hair or whatever, and we can make an isopathic remedy from that or potentize it using specific technology, and you can put that back as a treatment for them, or to sort of assist.
Yes.
Um, I know Dr. Jerry Tennant in his clinic, they've got a whole system on that with detoxification and all sorts of stuff, where it's all basically frequency-based therapies that they're using to help detox from metals and all sorts of things, and having really great results. So I think ultimately what you all you really know when you start to investigate more and more is that there's so much more that you don't really know, and we don't really understand exactly how all of this stuff works. But I think what's important is, can you find certain treatments that seem to be working well for you, and then I don't need to understand all of it. I like to have some working theory because it helps me sort of move forward with it. But ultimately, if certain things are working well and I don't understand all of it, but the evidence is showing me that it seems to be working really well, then I'm going to keep kind of moving in that direction.
Sure, man. I want to introduce you to something that I think you're very familiar with because of all the amazing podcasts that you've done and just because of who you are. But lately, what's come to my attention, and part of this was inspired by Dale Pond, is something that's called, that John Keeley, one of the brilliant scientists of the 19th century, called mind force. I was in this technology called the Joe cell, and what we called it in the Joe cell technology was the Y factor, and it's the human factor. So there have been cases like, Dr. Andre Sain, he's an amazing homeopath. He's very classical, and he'll give a lot of the polycrests, where some of my mentors like Lou Klein and maybe Jeremy Schur and so on and so forth, Jan Schultens, they wouldn't do that. They would give more like smaller remedies and stuff. So, but he's still having a high rate of cure. Now, I'm convinced this could be a study, right? But what I think is happening is that the doctor's mind force is involved in giving the remedy. Now, that's not the same as the placebo effect. It's similar, but it's different. In other words, your confidence in what you're doing creates a bridge with the patient, with the person, and healing power flows through you right from the divine through your mental faculties. So I can see how you want to have some way of framing what you're doing, because it helps you channel your energies that are coming through
Absolutely.
you.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it means more to you, and it's through that sort of understanding and the attention to it and our intention to help. When you're
Yes.
focusing those two things, you're really generating a lot more of that mind force. And I would totally agree with you. I think a lot of what happens ultimately is in a combination of that dynamic with the actual person that you're working with, and how what they're believing to be true and what's going to help. And absolutely, this is
Yeah.
all part of like, entanglement theory. It's like your possibilities change from what they were not possible when you are now entangled with your practitioner. And so whatever now dynamic is going to go on between those two, you're going to open up into new possibilities. I think when you've got people that have worked in something like that, like all of those people that you were mentioning, they have, I mean, they've dedicated their life to that for decades and decades, and they've seen lots of it. So I think it's like through the time and attention and the focus and their understanding of, they're creating systems. I totally agree with you. I think that there's a big part of that, and then that actually creates the resonance frequency that's going to be healing for them.
Be healing for the person.
Yeah.
Now, if we keep looking at this, there's some masters that from them will originate a certain kind of medicine. Like, there's lots of different examples for this, but let's say the Upledger craniosacral program. Oh, maybe that's not the best idea, because lots of people get good results for that. It could even be some kind of supplement that's, have these amazing claims that it cures myasthenia gravis. Let's just go with that. And I'll say, okay, that's interesting. I'm really struggling in this case. Let me try this thing with the person. It doesn't work. because my mind energy is not invested in it the way the people who researched it and believed in it fully. It really shows you where the power of healing, I think, really is coming from. It's coming from us, from our hearts, when we don't have doubt, when we, again, the intention, when the love is there, you want the best for that person, and then you have deep faith in it. That's where the healing, I think, really comes from. And everything else is like this is going to sound very unscientific, so take it with a grain of salt, but everything else is like a crystal ball in a way to channel us through that modality.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
not saying that homeopathy is without principles. It has principles. But if one doctor is giving, let's say, nature muriaticum, and he's getting cures, and another doctor would go like, oh, I would never have given nature muriaticum with that. That doesn't look like a nature muriaticum case. I would give this remedy, and they're getting cures with that remedy in a similar case. It shows you that there's more to it than we've really looked at.
I think it's totally the way it happens for so much of it. Even like, I mean, I'm an osteopath too. And so I would find, even if I was working with like 5 or 10 other osteopaths, what I'm picking up as being a really big, important detail may be very different than what the other osteopath is treating and what the other one is treating. It doesn't mean that we're missing something, but I think we get directed as to how we are going to be of greatest service for that person in our dialogue with them. And whatever I'm going to do is going to be the best thing I can kind of do with them based on my information and what's coming up and being presented. Because you're in a dialogue with the body. That dialogue's not exactly the same. It's not a rote conversation with every single person. I'm having my unique dialogue with it, just like you would, just like this other person would.
Absolutely.
So I think there's a many different ways to finding answers that are going to support someone in healing. And it's going to come down, I think, in the people that I see that have really profound healing. I think it's when they really are, when they really believe in what they're doing, and their heart and their intent is really honorable and in the right place. It's like I think that just sets the stage up for phenomenal healing to start to happen.
Absolutely, absolutely. And one's task, therefore, is to clear any cobwebs away, ask the questions, build one's confidence. Like when I had Andre Sain on here, and just having an elder with all of his experience and his confidence in the medicine, is that to me might be what he teaches the best. Of course, he has the nuts and bolt details of homeopathy that he teaches, but when you stand in his presence and he has like his 50 years of homeopathic knowledge and experience, you can get osmotically this sense of faith and not fear, which is what is being taught in the colleges. Like a lot of the things, oh no, we wouldn't touch that condition because it's risky, like we would never do that.
Mhm.
And he would scoff at that and say, what the heck, you're a naturopathic doctor, what are you doing? Like, this is what you're here for, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I really appreciate that. And I think that doctors should be trained in how to use their mind in conjunction with whatever modality they're choosing as their modality to move that energy.
Yeah, and their heart, and
And their
really
heart, yes.
connect those two in there, and let the medicine really come from that place. And then whatever you are being inspired to learn more about and to integrate because you're getting excited and inspired to do it, that's information for us too. That's like you're better off to follow that than you are to kind of go, oh, I really am interested in this, but maybe that might be something that might be, I heard this was good for this person or whatever. I'm not super
Yeah.
interested in it. Maybe I should learn that. Maybe that may be a good business model or whatever.
Or all the cool
I,
kids are doing it,
yeah, I think like really dial into what works, what you're being really genuinely inspired and interested in. I really think that's like the stuff that we're supposed to be following.
Definitely. One of the things that I see in my program, because I'm mentoring now people in the holistic counseling process, the VIS dialogue that I teach in my program. And so I'm seeing this. I've seen this in myself for years now, but I see it also in my students when they have people that now they're dialoguing with. The amazing similarity of issues that the practitioner has to the patient. the whole idea of like, I'm the doctor and I'm helping you and you're the patient, right? Like that really dissolves away when you get in with your deep mind and your deep heart. There's this exchange of healing energy that they're coming to you, maybe not as much as you're coming to them, like the same thing, but there's definitely this phenomenon. I call that the gate effect. When your
Mm,
heart is open, people will come, and the right people will come. For it's really remarkable how your experience, your life experience, and your own issues that you've worked on prepares you for these people that come through your door to work with you.
yeah. Yeah, all the time. I would totally agree with that. Even I would find when I was in clinic, um, I would like just finish cycling through something, right? Or feel like I'd kind of made a big aha moment on something. And that could be even whether that was in like my relationships or whatever it might be. It could be anything. But
Yeah,
it's like it would be honestly within that week, I would find that scenario was coming up with the people I was talking about. And I just happened to then be in a place to be able to share my sort of experience with that and be able to really genuinely be there as a support and really being able to know what they were likely going through because I had experienced it firsthand. And I mean, it would still always astound me at how much that sort of thing would happen.
yeah, it's amazing. I also think there's another phenomenon at play which has to do with, you start as a practitioner and you have a certain challenge in practice. Practice is challenging. Well, then you grow as a practitioner and you attract harder cases. So now you have perhaps an equal amount of challenge, even though you yourself have improved and grown in experience, and so on and so forth. It never stops because the amount of dis-ease and pathology and suffering out there is enormous. And so and a very, very, very challenging case probably will not go to a very like a rookie practitioner because that's not going to work. It's not going to work. So they're drawn, and when that person is ready, they'll meet. Amazing phenomena, like to just observe this.
Well, and I remember even when, if that ever happened where someone happened to come in that was talking about something that, early on that I wouldn't have actually been ready to deal with, you know,
Mm-hmm.
I, I could feel in myself discomfort, and then you start to get all of the like, you know, fear of not being able to help them and judgments on it. All this kind of stuff would come up. And then recheck on that years down the road when you've had more experience and you've done more of your own, so you've had your own experiences with stuff, and then all of a sudden you can show up for it more fully
Yeah.
without all of the fears of all the ego stuff getting in on whether you're going to be able to do it. You can kind of be there just really present with them, and I think so much of the healing just opens up right from that spot,
Right.
just being
Absolutely.
okay, right? It's like
Yeah.
showing up for, I mean, I was just having a conversation with someone the other day about why do we have so much trouble dealing with emotions? Why do people have so much trouble dealing with emotions? And I go, I don't think a lot of people never got the opportunity to actually stay with an emotion long enough to see that you can have it and it has a middle and it has an end and you can come out the other side of it and you can be okay. And
Right.
I think about like with kids, like so many times when a child's like, say hurts themselves or they're upset, and it's like a lot of times the adults are trying to like make it better.
Yeah.
It's like,
Don't
here, have
cry.
this, take
Don't
this, don't
cry.
cry. Whether it's not okay to cry, or I think a lot of times like they have a hard time being there while the child's crying. Maybe it just makes them uncomfortable, they want to make it better, and it's like, just be there, like hold them and let them move through it, because now they've just learned that there's a process and that they can come
Mhm.
through that process. um
Absolutely. I love it.
yeah.
So good, man. So good. Okay, so let's go on to another topic here because you sent me this article and I put it up that we're going to talk about some of um,
Myocarditis
the
and all that stuff.
myocarditis and the cardiac pathology, and I think there's a lot of very valuable information there for people watching. I will also put a link up to the article itself in on my site, link up to article. I'll just leave myself a little note here. So basically, the article, I'm going to share my screen here. Let me see if I can find that, where that is here. Okay. So I'm going to share the screen. And this is a title. You'll see it in a moment. Okay, there we go. Myocarditis, once rare, now common. So the Dr. Levy basically expresses that myocarditis used to be very rare in his practice. And I would say probably in most general practitioners was very rare. Maybe if you were a cardiac specialist, it would be a little bit less rare, but it's still very rare. And now it's very prevalent after COVID and after the vaccinations.
Yeah. And I think the different numbers I've heard was that it used to be about 4 for every million, and now Dr. Peter McCullough recently had said it's about 25,000 per million right now. Like it's actually become quite prominent. And so I haven't seen all the data on that in the study. There's links to all of it. I mean, it's a really well researched article, the one that you've got pulled up there.
Yeah.
I don't know what, there's like 65 um,
References.
references
Yeah,
there. And
it's very amazing. It's really amazing. And this doctor is one thing that I'm very impressed with about this doctor is very open-minded. Speaks about not just about, the one of his processes of like treatment is like IV vitamin C, which
yeah,
is impressive. He does add the corticosteroids as well, but that's as an anti-inflammatory. That's what he knows to be an anti-inflammatory. But he also says something very interesting here. He talks about that the spike proteins shed by individuals that have been vaccinated can, even Pfizer's own internal documents advise about the possibility of environmental exposure. So in other words, that there is this shedding process that can happen.
mhm.
And this is a line that I really liked right here. It is never a good idea, and this is worded very intelligently. It is never a good idea to overestimate the integrity of the pharmaceutical industry. That's very like, it's like a hidden gem.
Yeah.
It's not hidden, but it's not, he didn't say that directly. So what do you find most valuable about this article? Let's chat about that, Doc.
Yeah, I mean, I like Dr. Thomas Levy. He also wrote a book called Rapid Viral Recovery. It's a totally free ebook. You can go and download it. It basically shows a lot of what he's done for a long time, including what he's done over the past 3 years for his patients, that he's found to be very effective. I think he's very much in alignment with, in a lot of ways, like Dr. Brownstein, who also wrote a book on um, treatments for viruses and stuff over this past while. And so I like the information they're doing. They're both very open, and they've been using a lot of these types of things for decades. It's not like this is new to them. A lot of what they've been using has been supportive for patients for a long time. So they've seen it work clinically. So
Yeah.
when he did this article here, I think this is, I mean, he's also a cardiologist. So it's like he really he knows these are the people that you want to be hearing this from.
Yeah.
I think that it was interesting that I think he's bringing information in a way that I think is really important. He's kind of showing like what they basically found is that it's all tying back to the spike protein, which I think everybody's pretty aware of now. And
And the
so
ACE2
anything,
receptor.
yeah, well, because that's where it's going to go on the ACE2 receptor, and that's basically anywhere there's ACE2 receptors, it's going to create damage. So if it binds to the myocardium of the heart, then it's going to lead to myocarditis. If it binds to the endothelium in the arterial wall, then you're going to start to get clots. So this is where it's
Yes.
just sort of building up. But anything that's causing more spike protein is going to be a problem. So he's saying whether you got COVID causes a trigger of reproducing spike protein. Whether you got the vaccine, that causes a reproducing of the spike protein.
That's
And he
right.
kind of shows really well that it's like, they found that in everybody. So whether you had COVID, whether you got vaccinated, whether you got vaccinated and didn't have COVID, they're seeing an increase in the spike protein. So he's basically saying all of these things are
Yes.
increasing the spike protein. What I think was really important about it is it's one of the first times that I think, other than just creating sort of like awareness around there's this issue going on. I like that he breaks down that we should be measuring certain things regularly on literally everyone now, because he said you don't even have to have symptoms to have elevated levels of, say, troponin, which he says is the
Yes.
most important one to check for myocarditis,
Yes.
particularly. And he even breaks that down in a lot more detail as far as we should be checking that in everybody because of this potential for the shedding. Like he says, there's not any really solid studies showing that, but it was talked about in the document in the Pfizer document, which we actually talked about in one of our Follow Your Oath videos way back when. We actually
Yes.
pulled up the Pfizer document that showed exactly that it can be transmissible.
Yeah, between
But
like sexual partners or just like
or even airways or touch.
airways. Yeah, exactly. And the
Um,
troponin level is a measure for the myocarditis. And it's good. What he recommends is just getting the test, even to just have a base level that you could compare with if you were to say get sick or start to feel a little funny or even not. I don't know. So that's one thing definitely that is an
yeah.
interesting. And he also establishes the correlation between an elevated troponin level and mortality, like basically severity of COVID, and when we're seeing deaths, it is associated with an elevated troponin level with this myocarditis.
Yeah, he shows that really clearly, I think, and even shows like even if you're within normal, but from your baseline you've been gradually coming up a little bit, that is even correlated with an increase in mortality. So it's like
Yes,
you don't want it to be going up. And he says sometimes it comes back down on its own, but he says a lot of times it doesn't. So it's sort of this marker that we should be checking. And I think what he's getting at, that why it's so important to check it, is because if you are on the upper side, or if you've checked it and then you've checked it again, it's gone up, or if you're already elevated, he's basically saying you need to be very aware of that before you ever think about getting a booster, because you will get then an increase in spike protein, which he's basically saying could put you over the hump. That's kind of one of the big things I think is his concern. Or if you got another COVID infection, that again would also cause it to increase and you would be at more at risk. So he's saying if that's the case, you really need to start intervention to get your troponin levels back down.
exactly. And he also makes a correlation between like all the died suddenly stuff, like the European athletes dropping dead on the soccer field or whatever field.
Yeah, he shows
Um,
that when you've got elevated troponin, you're more likely, if you are then doing like peak physical exercise, you're going to get an increase in like adrenaline and catecholamines, which can actually increase the electrical instability of the heart. So that's kind of where he's again saying like check it, because it's just information. If you know where you are, then start the process of getting it down, and know
yeah.
that you might be at a higher risk. So to be aware of when you're going to make your decisions moving forward around any kind of intervention.
Excellent, excellent. Well expressed. Now, I'd like to take a moment and juxtapose with what we were talking about before with the Dr. Cowan stuff. So, right now, we have a medical doctor whose model of reality is that there's a virus that has these spike proteins, and the mRNA vaccination is emulating that spike protein production, which, as a whole philosophical debate, if that was ever a good idea. Definitely not. um, However, here's this model of ACE2 receptors, spike proteins coming and upregulating the insertion and thrombosis and inflammation, and these markers that we could tangibly measure in the blood, like troponin and D-dimer for like clotting and stuff like that. So okay, so what do you like? I want to juxtapose what we just talked about a few minutes ago, right? Like, so what do you think about that?
Yeah, I know. I find it all really interesting because it's like I think it just sort of shows that we still don't really know exactly what it is. To me, it's like I don't know exactly what it is. I think when you're using the different treatments, they are talking specifically about the spike protein. You talk to Dr. Cowan, he'd say there actually is no real spike protein. We haven't really, it's not really something we've been able to measure. He would still say that's likely more of an artifact, I think. You'd have to ask him
Mhm.
specifically about that, but I'm sure he would sort of say all of this is probably something else. Now, I don't know. What I think is curious is that if you're doing any of these therapies, and you're seeing a measurement, because still we don't really know exactly what it's doing. And these different therapies are supposed to be working with binding up the spike protein or helping to get rid of it so that it doesn't accumulate so much, which is why it's supposed to be beneficial. So whether you're doing, any of the different therapies we can chat about in the bottom of the stat
Yes.
of the
Yeah.
document there. Um, but who knows? Maybe that's on a whole different level of whatever they're doing, and it has nothing to do with the spike protein, but they're still assisting in getting troponin and D-dimer levels back down, which are showing that something is improving an outcome, right? I
Yeah.
think that the idea of how it's doing it is almost irrelevant if you're seeing a correlation with an actual marker that you can measure, right? So if I'm doing something, it's like even if I was doing a liver detox. I didn't know exactly how the specific thing was working, but I'm seeing, AST and ALT levels coming back down into a nice range. I know that I'm supporting the liver and preventing damage. I might just not know all of the actual nuances of how it's
Right, right.
doing
But
that.
those are liver markers. So the liver is affected. And these are heart markers. So we know the heart is affected.
Right.
Now, if there was no virus, if there was no toxin, because he actually mentions, Dr. Levy mentions at the beginning, he says that, these spike proteins could be considered toxins, and they could persist indefinitely because of their ability to replicate. He says a toxin that has such an ability is truly a clinical nightmare. So, I mean, these are tangible things. I thought that we could actually see at the electron microscopy level, we could see spike proteins and ACE2 receptors binding. I thought we could see that stuff.
I'm not certain myself, but I know I believe in the episode I did with him, that was a while ago. Um, he talked about, I think this is supposed to be a spike protein, but he actually pulled up a document where he showed up a study on that where I think they had the exact same thing in like some sort of renal biopsy that they had done like decades ago, and it's the exact same stuff. So I think he said it was
Oh,
like basically it's all a clathrin molecule. So I think
right.
there's just, again, it's like, sometimes even when I see what they show, I still don't know exactly what that means. Um,
Right.
and
Fair
I
enough.
don't think he's going to be happy until he sees you know, prove
I
to me
just
that
think
that's
that
what it is.
I think it's really good what we're doing. We're turning over every rock, we're exploring, we're keeping an open mind. We don't know yet, but there should be, I think, a kind of a unifying theory that makes sense of everything. There was a guy, and I'm not endorsing this guy's theory, but sometimes a person will come out and they'll say it's snake venom. That's what it is. It's snake venom. Like they've weaponized snake venom. That was Dr. Brian Artis, right? He's a chiropractor. And he's like, when somebody does something like that, they try to check all the boxes. And they say, well, this is why this is happening, this is
Hmm.
why this is happening. And I'd like to see somebody come up with a plausible. I don't know if I fully resonate with that. Something didn't feel truly right, or something off about that whole
Yeah.
presentation. Right, but
Yeah,
there,
I agree.
yeah, yeah, but there should be a kind of a unifying, some kind of theory, like what Einstein was working on in physics, which they're coming to now with like quantum theories and quantum entanglement. But that kind of unifies all these different things that we're seeing: elevated troponin, D-dimer, all this crazy clotting. Like, what's going on? There's a way to explain it, I think, which you know, I'm looking for as well as you are, I'm sure.
Yeah, and I mean, I just think that, I mean, at least what I usually find with science is the best we've got at if it's done properly,
Yeah,
as far as how we can assess things from that lens in this moment in time. And most of the time, give a little longer when we develop better tools and we can look. So we kind of usually realize that what we were looking at was not actually quite right. It's actually more this. And that just keeps going on all the time. So
yeah,
whatever it is, to me, it's like I almost don't even care too much, because I think if there's something that we are finding that is helping with markers that we know are very, like something like that, where you have something like a troponin marker or a marker that's like a functional marker for how well that system is doing. When you can affect that with whatever you're using, you might not, or you might have a working theory, but that doesn't mean that's the absolute correct theory. It's often a
Yeah.
working theory in progress,
And
and
as you
as
said,
we learn more, we might be able to fine tune it more and more. I
right.
honestly think it's going to go even beyond when we eventually start to view medicine less from a biochemical model, more from a physics model. I think everything that we look at, I think it's all going to be very different.
Oh yeah, I agree. I agree. And as you said earlier, which I support, is the idea that, well, if you, okay, so you have a marker, like for what we don't know why, let's say we don't know why the troponin level is up. Maybe it's 5G that's causing inflammation of the heart, right? It could be.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I think it could be anything, and how, even when I've been looking at it from this concept of just sort of susceptibility on all of these other abstract bodies of health, when you just get outside of the physical, all of these things can affect it. And
Yeah,
I mean, to
absolutely.
me, it's like there's been such a, like what he would say is even when someone is ill, a lot of these artifacts increase. When there's more breakdown, you will see these artifacts increase. So they'll
Yeah.
usually say that it's a virus, but he's just saying that the artifacts increase when you're ill, period, whatever it is. So
Right.
it's
It's
not that that's
exosomes. Your body's
whatever.
toxic and it's trying to dump all this stuff out.
Yeah.
The problem that I have with that is that the body's intelligent. I do believe in that. I believe in intelligence. I don't think everybody that inhabits their body is intelligent, but I think the body itself has an inherent intelligence. And why would the system or the mode of repair be deadly?
Well,
Like,
I don't think it's supposed to be, but I think this is a part of probably what gets in the way of our bodies functioning optimally. I would say probably like cancers. Our body's not supposed to do that, but it seems to go on this
well, if you
totally
look at
wonky
German
cycle.
German new medicine, like cancer is like a recovery phase. When the tumor develops, it's actually in the recovery phase from the shock or from the trauma, the emotional trauma. So
Yeah.
some of the recovery phases, like literally a heart attack, is a recovery phase from some kind of emotional loss. Um, but it can kill you. Like, so I have a problem with that theory, like that this or anything that supposes that, okay, this is a healthy detoxification system, but sorry, it might kill you. Like I struggle
I
with
guess
that.
when I think about that, I think if the body itself is healthier, then I think we probably handle certain things better. It's like a hormetic stress. A hormetic stress can be a really beneficial thing on someone that's healthy, but it could actually be, it could kill somebody that's not very healthy, right?
Fair enough.
We're going to have
Okay.
a different, so I think like, when I was asking him then what's at the root of it, and he was talking more about the relationship with water, and he was saying, essentially it, there's more to it, but he's talking about the water and sort of this plasma-like substance that's the cytoplasm, and that literally is like where the water there that becomes sort of the antenna for the field. All the information's in the field that kind of goes in there.
It stores it that the cells have this antenna that like draw in whatever they're getting from their environment. Yes.
Yeah, so he's kind of saying, so whether it's polluted water or polluted energy, that's going to lead to disease, period. So that's kind of at the foundation. If you simplify it, would just be where are we polluting any of that, and polluting it from all of those different levels. Like he's saying, if you're in an environment where there's mass fear everywhere, that's a pollution for that energy field. That's going to pollute the cytoplasm in the water. Like that would be sort of that way. And that might be a far stretch for some people to kind of grasp if you've never really thought about it like that. But the more I've dived into it, I really think so much of it that is at the heart of so much of it. And I think that's probably why when you get sort of cure when you are, your mind and your heart are really connected. And I really think we actually pure, almost like what Emoto found, like with water, when you would like do a
Yeah.
prayer for water, you would change it. It
Yeah.
can happen like that. And this is, even like Dr. Ibrahim Kareem, they've done a lot of this type of stuff too, and they've seen very similar things. He even worked with Emoto for a period of time on a lot of the work that they've done with biogeometry. I was
We're
looking at
70% water.
And
Yeah, so if you're
I was
having
looking at,
high thoughts align with your truth, that water is going to be resonating with that thought.
there's a water researcher, Ralph Sudeth, I think. Sudeth. He has a really cool video out on YouTube, and he's created these different water purification systems, and he actually took these things into these like polluted lakes in the States and ran them and literally cleaned it. He even showed
Yeah,
that you could put this into a polluted hot tub and run it, and it would completely purify. And all it was doing was, and I'm not going to say all of it because I don't know all the details, but it would basically create it, it would sort of vortex in a specific way, and it ran specific geometry around it where the water would almost become like live water. I mean, part of this would become structured water, and it would carry the information that was being vortexed through with this
yes.
different geometry. And so essentially, it's like if the frequency of the water elevates, then a lot of the pathogens that were in the water were no longer able to exist within that frequency. It just drops
It
off.
just drops off.
And he
Yeah,
proved it over and over again. And he was supposed to have a big contract, but the chemical industry said you cannot have water, like drinking water, without it having a certain amount of chlorine in it. And even though he proved you could completely clean the water using these devices.
you
There's
could literally
more.
even extract the chlorine from it from vortexing.
That's exactly what I talked
Yeah,
with Dr. Cowan about too. That's what he was saying. You could
exactly.
even almost smell the chlorine coming off because the same thing, when that water becomes structured, the chlorine molecules can no longer stay bound. They end up aerosolizing and having to come off. So it's sort of this idea that, I mean, this is where I think it's really fascinating. And this is where I find when in all the work that we get to do, this is the stuff that I get the most excited about because I just think like, you know, it's just like healing can actually be a lot faster and cleaner than it needs to than I think we currently do it.
Right.
We're just sort of keep moving towards there and trying to understand it better and how to implement it. But I find all of that really fascinating. I think all of the medicine tied to those areas of frequency and vibration and geometry and stuff. I think it's all really really fascinating stuff.
Me too. Me too. You know, Dr. Cowan introduced an idea which you mentioned just recently in passing, which my friend Topher, Christopher Gardner, he also has a podcast that he talks about stuff. He was also on with Dr. Cowan. Dr. Cowan was interested in his alternative building. So he was a builder in Costa Rica using stuff like aircrete and like earth bagging and like sacred geometries, domes.
Yeah, yeah,
So one of the things that Topher is interested in is this ancient architecture that we see in our big cities, like in St. Petersburg and like in even parts of America, like these big domes, and they all have these antenna,
yeah,
and they were grounded into some body of water.
yeah,
So they were doing exactly what the body is designed to do, is like as an antenna,
yeah.
pick
The
up
Taj
some.
Mahal, the Vatican, like
Exactly,
all of those.
exactly. Thank you. Thank you. So these buildings that have this sort of pattern to them, and Dr. Cannon was also establishing that the cell, actually, when you look at it, when you really look at the cell, not in the funny way that they prepare it, which is sort of on par with how they mishmash everything to find
Yeah,
viruses. It actually comes out as a dome with an antenna. It looks like an antenna, and that is grounded into water, our
yeah,
body.
exactly. That's exactly what we were talking about with the information from the field being through that antenna into the cytoplasm, and then that affects us. I mean, there's been a lot of conversation around water um, over the last few years in many different ways, and I really think that the concept of memory being housed in water on multiple levels, like
Right.
right back literally to the primordial sort of Big Bang. I really think that there's a way that we will eventually be able to connect to sort of the original blueprint, which I think then through resonance we will be able to sort of have healing happen very quickly. So
Yeah, have you heard of deuterium depleted water? Have you heard of that
yes,
DD8,
yeah,
DDW?
I
So
don't
there's
know too
some
much
of,
about it, but
basically deuterium is like a heavy hydrogen. It's got an extra neutron, I believe, in its nucleus. That's the idea about it. That might not, that whole model might not be true either, right? But basically that's the idea. And by when you volatilize the water, so when you distill the water, you basically drop off some deuterium and it becomes pure water, deuterium depleted. So when I had George Wiseman last year, he's a big Brown's gas guy, big Brown's gas technology. And he was teaching us about new water. New water is water that is created when you burn hydrogen and oxygen in the perfect ratio from having just electrolyzed it. So you basically use a high voltage or voltage, and you electrolyze
Hmm.
your water, you get hydrogen gas, oxygen gas, and then if you burn that gas, you get water dripping out of it. That water is pure potentiality.
Hmm.
It has pure potentiality that you can somehow code it with intention and it will become that what you encode it with. And there have been some very interesting demonstrations with that. So I think the research water, we know so little about water, really.
Yeah, I think that's all really fascinating, and it's in alignment with some of the other work that I've looked into as well around water, and particularly a lot of the biogeometry stuff where they're looking at how to basically bring the life force back into water,
Yeah,
which essentially then will be a healing modality for us because then we'll get in resonant with that and whatnot. So, I mean, we've even been playing with that in different ways here. I mean, where we are, we've actually kind of found like a true underground spring where we can actually go up, and it's a bit of a hike to get there and everything, but we're getting this
worth
like
it.
absolutely, we'll break our jugs up, we bring the kids up and we go up there, and it's about maybe a 20-minute hike up, and then we'll fill up our jugs with this like pristine directly from underground spring and
Beautiful. That's so
super clean
important.
water. So now, we've got that and we take that home and we do a trek out there every week and get about 3 jugs of it. And that's our water that we use.
Good for
And
you.
there's something
We
about that that just feels like, I really do think that, um, there are specific information that is housed in water. And I think that we are exposed to that. I think we have a relationship with it. So I'm always really curious to just see what I notice. And I also, because we got a 5 and a 6-year-old, and I want them to be exposed to as much of that
yeah.
stuff as they can right from the get-go. So,
Ask them how they feel. When we came, when we moved out of where we were drinking Montreal City tap water, and we were filtering it in a very good filter, but the energy of the water is still tainted and it's got stuff absorbed from all the people and the fear and the chaos. And when now we have a well, and we filter the well water, and then I vortex it. I created a vortex machine, and
cool.
it's the water is constantly going in a vortex, and that's very Victor Schauberger, and that's the geometry that you were talking about, that gentleman that was like making the chlorine come out. And that water brought my level of consciousness and my health and my vibrational reality way up. Just that water alone.
Yeah.
It's amazing. Schauberger said that the intelligence of a community, of a population, is directly proportional, directly related to the quality of water that they drink.
I would totally agree with that. Um, I would totally agree with that. And, it's also why, it's been such a funny world over the last while, but it's like, it's why I don't want to have outside of all of the, whether it's got chlorine and this and that, but I think all of that destructures the water and then makes it loses its information. And it's like, it's also like, you start to explore beyond just looking at our physical reality. You explore it yourself, and you talk to indigenous folks, and you talk to shamans, and you look at what some of the researchers, these brilliant guys are doing, like Schauberger and stuff like this, and what they're looking at with water. It's fascinating. You really have to look at it as a living system, and that actually houses information and holds information. And I think when you do, you change your relationship with it. I would absolutely agree. When we started drinking that sort of water, we felt the same thing. We just
Yeah,
knew. You would just get this like craving for it sometimes too, and just be like, or when we get there and I'm just drinking it straight from the river, and we
yeah,
kind of sit there. And we'll get the kids to even go, and we'll do like an offering to the spring and stuff like that, and say a little prayer
Well,
for it and
that's
stuff.
beautiful. I think water, I don't think I've had experience of water actually being holy.
Yeah, well, and it
Holy
is.
water. It is.
It's used in almost every sacred ceremony you can think of. Water is usually placed in that. And in through the process of it, you're actually raising the vibrational signature in that water. I mean, it's really cool stuff. And I mean, depending on where the audience is at with all of that, but it's like
Yeah.
try it and see. To me, it's like the more I've been in this field for now, like in healthcare for over 25 years, and as an ND for over 20, I just find I'm less and less excited about the purely physical modalities, and I just think that true health and wellness and all of this stuff exists in all the other layers and filters down to that. So I just find that much more interesting to explore nowadays.
100% because it's closer to the source, you know? So this is great. So I think what might be helpful, just let's go over some of the suggestions that the doctor has too, and we could throw in our own. So I appreciated what he had. These are like suggestions for what to do to bring the troponin levels down, to bring the D dimer levels down. Let me just share the screen here again. Where is that? Is that this? Is that that? That's this. Okay, here we go. So now, not everybody has access to intravenous vitamin C, but he recommends
Liposomal or sodium ascorbate.
yeah, that you can actually get liposomal or even just regular old, sodium sodium ascorbate or calcium ascorbate or something,
Yeah.
and just take a whole lot of that, and that'll do it. So vitamin C. Now he does recommend hydrocortisone with each dose, probably for the anti-inflammatory.
Yeah, and I think depending on where people are at, it's like that with some of the different almost emergency medicine drugs. Sometimes there can be a place for that in a very short period of time just to
Yeah,
get things down. I think that could be valuable.
yeah,
And
it's
I know
better to
that's one
save
of
a
the ones
life.
they've found for sure.
Yeah.
Though, have you ever heard of methylene blue?
I looked that up. It rings a bell, but I'm not familiar with it in any kind of clear way. What do you know about that?
I don't know that much about it, but I remember we interviewed Dr. Todd Ovokades several times. I love the guy; he's just brilliant. But he was actually talking about primarily for like brain and mitochondrial function. All it's apparently Powerhouse One does a lot of different stuff. And then recently they had started to see methylene blue again, kind of tied into the concept of I think binding up with spike protein and stuff too, and sort of
Okay,
building into the
interesting.
systems.
Yeah. So binding up with spike proteins, I mean, we have, we heard through the grapevine, and I've tried it myself, like pine needle tea.
That's one that I was surprised wasn't on here because I
Yeah.
I actually think I mean we've had pine needle extract for a while. I also think pine's such a phenomenal healer. I mean, there's so much good stuff you can get from pine where you get, the needles, you can get pine needle or pine needle tincture, which is can be beneficial for both clotting and for
A-
myocarditis.
Absolutely. So I would put it there. And I would actually add some of the other really good detoxifiers like NAC and what's it called? What comes after NAC? It's the oh man, I'm blanking out right now. Oh, it's on the tip of my tongue. Okay, it'll come to me in a minute. Do you know what I'm talking about? It's really it's a detox.
ALA, alpha
Glutathione,
lipoic acid, or
glutathione.
glutathione. Yeah, and when I have people do glutathione, the main problem with glutathione is it doesn't absorb very well. So I think if you're going to do glutathione, it's like usually needs to be liposomal and you hold in the mouth for a period of time. Or what I actually really like now is I like the idea of nebulizing a specific variation of glutathione that's in a sodium ascorbate base. So you can actually put it in the nebulizer and then just inhale it in. I think that's a really
Yeah,
effective way of trying to get glutathione into the
I
system.
love that. He also recommends
Especially if it's COVID kind of related stuff, that can be beneficial potentially
100%.
just for any kind of lung troubles.
He also recommends like the hydrogen peroxide nebulizations. I did that when I had COVID, what I
Yep,
thought was
we've done that too, and we've done that with our kids as well. He does a 3%, which I think I've seen it anywhere from Dr. Brownstein does it as a 0.04% hydrogen peroxide, and Dr. Mercola did a 0.1%, and I know Dr. Levy goes up to a 3%. So it just kind of shows there's a big range.
yeah,
But
big range, sure.
I really like that. We would do saline with the 0.04% hydrogen peroxide and a drop of like a 5% Lugol's iodine solution in that. And I just found that's been like a super, super potent one for myself and for my family at the first signs of getting any kind of troubles. Um,
Nebulized with iodine, yeah,
yeah, like this is all based off of um,
I did that as
the
well.
holistic approach to viruses. That's this book by
Yeah,
Dr. Brownstein. He talks about that protocol specifically that he had been using for a long time for just flu, and then he still used that for a lot of his patients with COVID. So,
yeah, that's great.
as something, I'm not saying that's what everybody's got to go do. They should talk to their own healthcare professional around that. But these are things that we do in our house, and I found them to be really beneficial.
Yeah, same here. I did it as well. So then here are just a lot of the naturopathic things. I mean, not just naturopathic, but
Standards.
there's a lot of research, a lot of study. You want to definitely want to elevate your vitamin D, lots of vitamin C, and then zinc, quercetin, olive leaf extract, the antiviral um, action that it has. If that model even exists in reality, whatever, it's doing something good. And then he
Yeah.
suggests all these like peptases, all these different uh, basically enzymes to break down
Clotting.
clotting. And then these are some more advanced stuff like for instance, hyperbaric oxygen treatments. I've heard a lot of good things about this. I don't have too much experience.
No,
Here's
and Dr.
hydroxychloroquine.
Peter McCullough just did a couple things on that too, where he was talking about that and seeing that as a good option that he's been seeing some benefits with as well
I want
for
to add
COVID.
Brown's gas as well, and that's it's not hard to make Brown's gas. Well, I shouldn't say it's not hard if you don't really know electronics and stuff, but it's basically very simple technology. You have a positive, negative electric plates, and you just put enough voltage through, and it gasifies the water, and you breathe that. You want to filter out too, because you're going to probably use sodium hydroxide as an electrolyte, so that there's enough enough current flowing to break the bonds there, the intermolecular bonds of water. So Brown's gas is really good. What George Wiseman suggested was that China uses this as the number one way of dealing with COVID is Brown's gas. I
Oh, really?
cannot verify that, but that's what he said, and it's something interesting to investigate. So
Interesting.
yeah, it's so interesting. So again, there's hydrogen peroxide, UV light of the blood, ozonating blood. It's a little more invasive. Ivermectin, as preventative and as also as a treatment. So these are just some, I mean, there's nothing new here really, but it's still good. It's nice to see a medical doctor, a cardiologist coming forward with this really valuable information. So I appreciate this article a lot. I've learned a lot from it, and I'm going to share it on my site here for anybody that wants to get the whole article.
Yeah, I thought it was really good when I first read it too. I thought, oh, that's just paints a really big overall picture. And I like that it gave people, like to me as a clinician, it's like check markers on people if you're able to, if you have access to it. It's like, and you're gonna have them do blood work on something, like you might as well put it on there and check.
Yeah,
I've
yeah,
had some different
right.
patients where they've come back and they've even become aware of it and they've requested from their doctors to get those markers done. So I
Yeah,
think it's a good idea. It's information and helps you kind of decide. When you see all of these treatments, it can look like a big laundry list. I mean, you can't do all of it, but sometimes knowing where you are helps you figure out, what to fine tune and to work with your practitioner to be able to narrow down for you, right?
exactly. Exactly. Like for instance, what we know about troponin is that elevated levels of troponin are associated with mortality, right? So you want to bring it down. So if you find it's elevated, you want to bring it down, regardless of why. Like this is what you were saying. It doesn't really matter what's causing that. And it doesn't matter what treatment you're doing, maybe within some realm of it might matter in some instances, but if you can bring it down with a number of these things, well, then you've gotten back into a safe zone, let's say. And I mean, I think it makes sense to use the medicines that resonate a lot with you. Like
Yeah.
I wouldn't necessarily, unless I was totally like very, very advanced in pathology, I wouldn't use hydrocortisone, I wouldn't do the cortisone route. I would use some of that other stuff, but in any case,
Yeah, and I think too, like depending on what you know, and sometimes like just even you can measure some of these things, like check different markers, even like, vitamin D and zinc and
yeah,
these types of things. It's like, I always think it's a good idea to get a good overall picture from a nutrient status, like where are you? So you know if you're really low to begin with, and zinc and quercetin might be a really good one for you to jump on. I mean, it's been one of the highlights for the last 3 years, but it's also
yeah.
a chronically low one. Almost everybody I measure is lower than they should be in zinc.
Yeah, sure, sure. Sure, this is great. This is great. All right. So, Doc, this has been a pleasure. I think we've covered a lot of very interesting topics, and I love how we wove stuff together. I would like to leave you the opportunity to share anything left in your heart to share, or something you meant to say, but you haven't said it yet. Whatever it is, just take a few moments, and I'd like to offer you that opportunity.
Oh, I appreciate it. I think this was really fun, Moshe. I think it's just fun to get together and chat about some of these things that are coming up and have candid conversations about stuff without feeling like you got to totally self-censor yourself on everything. And that would be something I think has actually been probably my journey over the last couple of years has really been that concept of where am I needing to censor myself just in my own life, period. And
Mm,
outside of what's been obvious around what we have to kind of, what's been censored sort of in social media and all this kind of stuff. But to me, it's been a good reflection to look back and it's like, where else do I find myself self-censoring who I am and sort of suppressing my own individuality? And I feel like one of the most important things we can all do right now is just like really show up as who we are, really be ourselves and put more of our own individuality into the world. I really think that's what needs to happen, and that's what's going to create the biggest type of shifts that's going to happen in our own lives as well as in the rest of the world. Is just move back to a place of inner authority. Doesn't mean there's not an outer authority. There's always going to be some sort of likely outer authority, but run everything still through yourself. You still count, and you got to run stuff through yourself and see where it lands for you. And then check where you're self-censoring, whether that's with your partner, whether that's with work, whether that's with whatever. Just be aware of it. And then sometimes just in the awareness of it opens up these aha moments that I think really is important insights that we can get. So
yeah.
I kind of leave everybody with that as something to contemplate. Um, Outside of that, go check out our podcast. We've done some amazing interviews. We've got a really amazing series right now. It's called the Inspire Health Podcast. And right now, we often do series. So we'll pick like a topic and we will round that out with like 8 to 20 guests and really try to get a good overall picture of it. And the one we're doing right now is called Life, Death, and Beyond: Exploring Our Greater Reality. And part of this is I want to explore the concept of death and beyond. And there's so much fear tied into this conversation. And I think the more that we can bring more awareness to it and maybe expand our limited concepts of it, it allows us to show up and live our life in a different way when we don't have so much fear around death. And so this has been fascinating for myself and my wife to talk to these guests. But these are like near-death experiencers and scholars and mystics and lots of different people that are really tapped into the beyond and have had firsthand experience there. And these conversations I think are really fascinating. So check that out. Check out some of the other series and see what lands for you. But I think right now it's a really exploratory time, like we
Yeah.
talked about, where, question lots of stuff, question what we think we know to be true, and, approach everything with a little more curiosity and openness and see where stuff lands.
That sounds like really great advice that I love that, and encourage everybody to take a look at Dr. Loken's podcast. Very, very, very well done, very high level, very well done, very interesting people. You've had some really great minds on there. And I think I think you're doing a great job. So I'm honored that you came on to NDs for Truth. I
Oh, this has
appreciate
been
that.
fun for sure.
Yeah, and thanks, Doc. So thank you everybody for watching and checking us out. I wish you all the love in the world, and I agree with Dr. Loken that being true to oneself, being oneself, just showing up as you are, is probably the greatest determinant of health.
Yeah,
That
I would agree.
makes all that water real happy in there, and just kicking out the spike proteins and the chlorine and then anything else that doesn't belong. So on that note, I'll say take care. Peace be with you, and we'll see you on the by and by in the next NDs for Truth.
Thanks very much, guys.